Thank you for making time in your schedule to join us. I do want to thank again Tony Clark, Sylvia Naguib, as well as Dr. Meredith Evans, who's the director of the Carter Presidential Library Museum. And I've worked with them in many capacities over the years. And every time I ask if we can use their space and take advantage of this amazing facility, I am always greeted with an immediate absolutely. So I thank Dr. Evans, Sylvia, and Tony for you guys for always being willing to open the doors to me and now to the city of Atlanta for this important program. Thank you. We are expecting perhaps 2 or 3 commissioners. As many of you perhaps know, the Chattahoochee Brick Company property was purchased by 3 Atlanta departments, the Department of City Planning, the Department of Watershed Management, and the Department of Parks and Recreation. And so before we begin, as I just mentioned, one of our commissioners is here, Commissioner Pence. If you don't mind, maybe coming up and giving a few remarks, and then we'll kind of kick this off. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to see so many people here. This is a really exciting day for us as we kick off our education series. The Chattahoochee Brick Company is high on my department's to-do list. Convict labor is something that is a shameful piece of our history, but it's something that we all need to know about, and we need to understand why it happened, and we need to look to the future to make sure that no one forgets, so that nothing like this can happen again. The Chattahoochee Brick Company is a place where bricks were made from our good red Georgia clay, and where a lot of bad things happened. This property is going to change from a forgotten industrial place with a bad history to a wonderful waterfront park that our whole city and whole region can enjoy. There's a lot of environmental work to do there because there's a lot of soil contamination. Our team is working together with the city's Department of Parks and Recreation to make this a place that everyone can enjoy. I hope you will enjoy our presentation today about just how we're going to do that. And I hope you will take part in our planning sessions, not just for the Chattahoochee Brick site, but also for our city as we embark upon our comprehensive plan process. That's a 20-year long-range plan for the city's growth and development. There are invitations out at the table where you signed in. The kickoff meeting is on February 29th at Greenbrier Mall, and I hope you will all come out and be part of that. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you, Commissioner Pence. So before we get started, why are we here? What is this all about? As Commissioner Pence mentioned, there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the site. I know, I've heard, I don't know personally, but I've heard that there are a lot of folks clamoring to get onto the site, clamoring to make use of the property, wondering what the city is going to do with the property, and that's fine. But there's a lot of work that has to be done on the site before we can really think about having people or having people kind of walking around and taking advantage of the natural beauty that is the Chattahoochee Brick Company site. That may take a while. So what we're hoping to do is, in the interim, provide these kinds of opportunities for people to not only learn about the Chattahoochee Brick Company site and our plans for it as those plans move forward, but also what today is about and what these next 4 events will be about is helping the public understand what the site was before it was the Chattahoochee Brick Company site. So we have 5 programs, today being the first one, that we're going to host. This first one is kind of an overview, and we're going to have Dr. Myrick-Harris talk about the importance of memorializing sites like this. So she'll do a kind of keynote talk in just a little bit. And then after Dr. Myrick-Harris does her talk, we'll have Andrew Walters and Donna Stevens, as well as DJ Sims, come and talk about what's going on the site. Andrew, from the city's perspective, but we're also working with a lot of stakeholders. We're working with a lot of individuals. Ms. Stevens represents one of those groups with which we're working, the Chattahoochee Brick Company Descendants Coalition, and DJ Sims, of course, is with the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, also one of our stakeholder partners. And so they will talk about what they're doing, how they are helping the city manage this process. And so that's what today is about, kind of focusing our attention on the importance of memorializing these kinds of sites, and then giving the public, giving you folks an opportunity to kind of hear some of what's been going on since the city acquired the property in August of 2022. The next program we host a month from now will be talking more about Native peoples and what the Chattahoochee Brick Company, what the Chattahoochee River and that area meant to Native peoples in this country before it was this country. The third program will focus on the African-American experience both during and after slavery. The fourth program will focus on 19th century labor, which is what the Chattahoochee Brick Company was. It was an industry of the 19th century, and talking about James English and the kinds of environmental impacts companies had during the late 19th century. And then the final program, which will happen in June, will kind of talk about the bricks and how bricks might be used as a metaphor for the building of the city of Atlanta, including some of the city's divisions that would take place in the decades after the Civil War and into the early 20th century. So these 5 series are kind of meant to help set the stage for other activities that will be helping us to engage with the public over the next couple of years, until such time as we can really provide an opportunity for the public to get on the site in a safe way. And so just wanted to kind of give you that overview. Today, we will have Dr. Myrick-Harris give her talk, followed by talks from Andrew, Ms. Stevens, and DJ. And then at the end of that, we will entertain questions and thoughts and comments for all of us. And that will be the end of today. So without further ado, I will read Dr. Myrick-Harris's bio and bring her to the podium. Clarissa Myrick-Harris is a professor of Africana Studies at Morehouse College and co-founder of the college's Black Men's Research Institute. She is also a principal investigator for the Morehouse Movement, Memory, and Justice Project, a Mellon-funded project focused on raising awareness about the inequities in the criminal legal system and working with other institutions and organizations to prepare Morehouse students to help transform that system. Prior to her current position, Dr. Myrick-Harris served as Dean of the Morehouse Division of Humanities and Social Sciences, Associate Provost for Strategic Initiatives, and Chair of the Morehouse Humanities Division. Before her tenure at Morehouse, she was founding director of the Curriculum and Faculty Enhancement Program of the United Negro College Fund's Institute for Capacity Building, and served as the Institute's interim executive director. Dr. Myrick-Harris has also held leadership roles at Lincoln University of Missouri, Savannah State University, and Morris Brown College. Early in her career, she was on the faculty at the University of Georgia and the University of Cincinnati. Professor Myrick-Harris's research focuses on the intersection of race, class, culture, and gender in the quest for social change and social justice. with an emphasis on leadership during the modern civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. Her publications include Call the Women, A Tradition of African-American Female Activism in Georgia during the Civil Rights Movement, in the book Southern Black Women in the Modern Civil Rights Movement, and Behind the Scenes, Two Women of the Free Southern Theater, a chapter in the Women of the Civil Rights Movement, Trailblazers and Torchbearers, 1941 to 1965. Her recent historical context study for the National Park Service, How They Lived, focuses on the family home of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King and the childhood home of Atlanta's first Black mayor, Maynard Jackson. She is currently working on the edited volume, Keep Pushing, the Atlanta student movement from quest for human rights to demand for Black power. Dr. Myrick-Harris is an advisor to the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, Truth and Transformation Initiative, a member of the board of directors of the Apex Museum, and the convener of the Committee to Commemorate the Atlanta Student Movement. She is also a 2022 recipient of the President Joseph R. Biden Lifetime Achievement and Volunteer Service Awards for her more than 30 years as a higher education leader/scholar activist. Dr. Myrick-Harris earned a BA degree from Morris Brown College, an MA degree from The Ohio State University, and her PhD right here in Georgia from Emory University. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Myrick-Harris.
Thank you, Anthony. It's good to be here. And before I begin my PowerPoint, just want to say, well, hello. It's a beautiful afternoon, isn't it? And thank you all for being here to have this important conversation about how to preserve the legacy, the history, and the unfortunate truths of the Chattahoochee Brick Company. And I appreciate, Anthony, the invitation to come to this gathering today to talk about the importance of memorialization and atonement, especially on sites where there has been victimization and dehumanization, murders of human beings. Just last week, several of the people in this room were on the campus of Morehouse College: Anthony Knight, DJ Sims, Donna Stevens, and let's see who else here was a part of our symposium. I think that's it in terms of the panel specifically on the Chattahoochee Brick Company and the efforts that are really being made by the City of Atlanta, the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, the Chattahoochee Brick Company Descendants Coalition, and I think also others like Karchik. My colleague Karchik Sims Alvarado was also on that panel to talk about the work of the Fulton County Reparations Task Force. That's a new entity and actually the first task force founded by a county in the country, I'm told. And so last week when we gathered, that symposium was about raising awareness and hearing about efforts to do this work of memorialization and also to really spur the spirit of activism in our students and fellow faculty and others in the community. I am really pleased to be here. At first, when Anthony asked me to speak, I thought he wanted me essentially to go through some of the history. So I started thinking about, okay, we're going all the way back to the 13th Amendment. And then we're going to talk about how the loopholes were found in that 13th Amendment. And that started the convict leasing system and so on and so forth. But you already, most of you, many of you in this room already know that history, and it's going to be covered in detail in subsequent sessions. Okay, so specifically about the Chattahoochee Brick Company, it was a study, and I'm quoting from it now. It said, and this was just, I think a few years ago, maybe around 2015, 16. Today, it is not only the existence of architectural remnants or even archaeological evidence on the site that holds the most significance, but rather the fact that it is among the only remaining landscapes where the conditions, the rapidly disappearing history of convict leasing in the American South can be revealed, studied, and utilized to educate the public about this dark period of Black history in the American South. But as I said today, I'm not here to talk specifically about the history, so much as to put this history and put this effort that we're undertaking through these collaborations and partnerships into context. And a precursory step, okay, and I'm losing my train of thought here. Okay, so why this question? Well, there is a saying that has been presented in a number of ways. I think in this part of the world, we first heard it from a philosopher, an American philosopher of Spanish descent, George Santayana. You heard about him? Okay. Though I'm quoting now, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Okay. And then later, Winston Churchill essentially paraphrased it and said, those that failed to, I can't do a Winston Churchill imitation. I'm sorry. I tried this morning, but it didn't work. Those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Okay. But I think what's going on here really is more in sync with the Sankofa principle of the Akan people of West Africa, of Ghana. The Sankofa bird, and for it here, the Sankofa bird flies forward with its head turned backward, symbolizing the belief that there must be movement and new learning as time passes, as this forward march precedes the knowledge of the past and must never be forgotten and must always be valued. And so what should it mean to preserve the site where thousands of African Americans were forced to work themselves to death, making bricks to build the wealth of a city, and then develop ways, we will develop ways to memorialize the many thousands who slaved and died there. So what should it mean? What should it mean? Definitions, please. We always have to begin with definitions, okay? Okay, so, and this is from a toolkit of an organization that specializes in memorialization and transitional justice, which I'll define in a minute. But memorialization refers to processes through which memory is perpetuated. It is a means of honoring, recognizing, and remembering, and is an age-old concept. Since the late 20th century, questions of memory and memorialization have gained increased significance in scholarly, political, and social spheres. Since the Holocaust, there has been increased concern with issues related to victims' rights and questions of morality, justice, and identity. This was further supported by the burgeoning of the transitional justice field as societies emerging from the aftermath of violence began to focus on ways to address the past, placing at its center the material, emotional, and moral needs of its victims. So what's transitional justice? It's a process which responds to human rights violations through judicial redress, political reforms, and cultural healing efforts in a region or country, and then other measures. We need justice. We need reparations. Oh, that's that word. And then we have to look to the future. So what do we mean by atonement? Atonement is what we do to fix relationships fractured by wrongdoing. To atone is, at first pass, to do something to repair this rupture by addressing the source of the rupture, namely the wrongdoing. The end goal is to become one, to be at one, or to reconcile. Making amends is often used to describe what is done to repair the rupture, and that's from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Memorialization and atonement in Germany. When I talked with Anthony and trying to get a sense of what I should talk about, he mentioned, well, look at what they're doing in Germany. I said, I was in Germany year before last, in the summer of 2022, in Berlin, in particular, in a community suburb outside Berlin. And so I actually had the chance to see for myself what I've been reading about over time. So over a 60-year period, Germany has established really far-reaching measures to memorialize and atone for the Jewish Holocaust, especially in cities such as Berlin, Munich. The country has worked to cultivate a culture of remembrance. Its restitution measures range from prohibiting Nazi statues, images, symbols, to compensating former owners and heirs for assets wrongfully seized during the Holocaust. The government made sizable financial contributions to victims' funds and survivors' pensions, in large measure as a result of the Luxembourg Agreement between Israel and the Federal Republic of Germany in 1952. The German government has paid more than $86.8 billion in restitution and compensation to Holocaust victims and their heirs. German school curriculums address the history. Students go on field trips to the concentration camps that have been turned into museums. While there in Germany, I actually went to the villa, in Wannsee. It's a little suburb just a few miles outside Berlin. And then the beautiful, it's out in the countryside, it's on the banks of a river. In that villa, Hitler met with his officers, and they came up with the final solution. The final solution, I didn't include that photo, but I have a picture of the final solution. It was on a piece of paper typed up nice and neatly. And he had a plan for sweeping across Europe to exterminate millions of human beings. So you go into that villa and you see exhibits. And this is just an example of one. An exhibit of a death march of individuals who were in the concentration camp at Dachau. They're marched to be exterminated. It is highly abstract, but I'm just seeing my student over there, Christian. It is abstract. It's like a maze, and the blocks you see, the monuments you see, are like tombs, like coffins. And people have their own interpretations of what it means, but when you go in, you certainly are. It's solemn, it's sad. But is Germany really a model? Or is there growing backlash? Over the past 25 years, many German cities and towns, large and small, have newly named schools and streets for prominent Nazis. Throughout the country, at least 7 public and private institutions, a graduate institution in one university, a college in another, a performance hall, a nursing home, a hospital, a street, and a school have been named for Alfred Krump, the industrialist found guilty of war crimes in 1948. And these things are being built by the Krump Foundation, a foundation established in his name, that give money to have these things erected, and they slap his name on them. And this is from a report done by Forward. It's a nonprofit Jewish organization in 2021, which they were looking at actual examples of memorialization of Nazism that still exists in Germany. And that's Mr. Krump himself. Came up, okay, and you were there last week, that's right. And Dr. Tate. But you were both with us on that trip to Montgomery. We went to the Equal Justice Initiative Museum, the Legacy Museum. We also, of course, while there, went through what's called, known as the Lynching Memorial, in which you see those monuments or memorials to victims throughout the country, African-American victims of lynching. Okay. And they defied the models used by many memorial projects. The funds in Montgomery come primarily, they told us during our visit, from private sources. They don't get public money. They don't get a lot of money from foundations. They did when they initially started. But I really think Brian Stevenson is from another planet, or some kind of Superman, because he has been able to really bring in these millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to build these monuments, this museum. And they're actually in the process of completing a third right there in Montgomery. And in addition to those 3 museums or memorials, the Southern Education or the Southern Poverty Law Center has the Civil Rights Memorial Center in Montgomery, the same city. Okay. So in Montgomery, Alabama, you will soon have at least five memorials, museums dedicated to revealing, sharing, understanding, educating people about the Confederacy, where Jefferson Davis lived. And then you have in Tulsa, and that's another trip that we took as partner organizations and individuals to look at what other people are doing, how they're doing it. Have any of you heard about what's going on in Evanston, Illinois? In 2018, they actually started a program in which the reparations took the form of providing affordable housing and opportunities for people to get mortgages, funds to go towards down payments, things that were about really restoring communities, preserving communities, elevating communities after years, decades, and longer of being in decline, being underdeveloped. And so that's what's extremely important to zero in. Of course, money is good, really good, but we're talking about a holistic, long-lasting approach. I think it's important to know about their efforts. And so far, it seems that there's been a lot of progress. The communities are being revitalized, communities that were depressed. So it's an investment, in many ways. These kinds of efforts, it's not just throwing money and giving money here. It's an investment in communities. It's economic development and economic redevelopment. The students will be leading a charrette process, bringing stakeholders to the table to talk about ways in which to identify and then make a plan for revitalizing a community. I know I'm not getting all of it quite right, but to get the gist of it. And so what Christian introduced me to just recently is the concept of within-gentrification. How many of you have heard of that concept, within-gentrification? In contrast to gentrification, within-gentrification refers to revitalization that's driven by the people already in the neighborhood. It means identifying assets in the community, bringing them together under common objectives, and raising the value of the place from within at a pace appropriate for revitalizing the existing community, not displacing it, as what happens most often in gentrification. The current residents of the community take the lead in revitalization rather than the newcomers or outside developers, telling residents what they need and ultimately pricing them out. The term was coined by University of Pittsburgh professor, Pastor John Wallace. Okay, so a concept that's really, really worth looking at, exploring, understanding. But the important thing to keep in mind here is about putting the people who live in the community at the center of discussions. So ultimately, the process of memorialization and atonement most definitely includes those things that are already being talked about in terms of green spaces, getting rid of toxic materials, specifically at the Chattahoochee Brick Company that exists, building spaces where people can commune, can come together, some type of living memorial and structure, all that really good. But at the outset, the planning has to also include a plan for redevelopment, for economic development, for infusing the communities, the African-American communities, the people, the descendants of those who lived enslaved in the Chattahoochee Brick Company and other similar situations, forced labor across the city, to find ways to atone and to enrich lives. And again, we're talking about an investment in the future of this city, of the county, of the state and ultimately of the nation.
I'm going to be giving you a little bit of an overview of what's happened up until now and what the next steps are, but what the city will be doing to redevelop the site. Most of you, I suspect, are somewhat familiar with the history of the Chattahoochee Brick Company site. But for those of you who are not, I'm going to give a brief summary so that we all have a shared background. The Chattahoochee Brick Company was a brick factory built on the Chattahoochee River. It was founded in the 1880s by James. One of the founders and owners was James English, who was at the time an ex-mayor of Atlanta and current police commissioner. And he operated the Chattahoochee Brick Company for the first 25 years or so, almost exclusively on leased convict labor. And convict leasing, for those of you who have not read about that, was a system that grew up after the Civil War across the South, and it really expanded after the end of Reconstruction. And in this system, prisoners who were arrested and convicted of a crime, instead of being sent to prison, they were sent out as forced laborers to farms or industrial sites, industrial operations like the Chattahoochee Brick Company. The owners of the factories and the farms would pay a small lease fee to the state, which was a fraction of what they would have paid for paid labors. The end of Reconstruction also marked the beginning of the passage of Jim Crow laws that stripped African Americans of some of their newly gained rights and freedoms, and created a situation where they were allowed to be arrested or were arrested for very petty or sometimes just made up crimes that would then push them into this convict leasing system. And the conditions at these sites, including the Chattahoochee Brick, were really brutal, and many of these prisoners died before completing their sentences. The Chattahoochee Brick Factory produced millions and millions of bricks during its operations, many of which, especially in those decades after the Civil War, when Atlanta was rebuilding, were used. The city of Atlanta bought a lot of bricks from the Chattahoochee Brick Company for paving of roads and streets, and many of these bricks were also used in buildings and houses and other buildings around the city. You can see bricks sometimes still underneath. Many of our downtown streets still have those bricks underneath multiple layers of asphalt. You can sort of see them during road work if there's road cuts. The factory did operate. The convict leasing was ended in Georgia by state law in 1909, and the factory then moved to paid labor, a significant drop in profits for a while there, but did operate all the way up until the turn of the millennia. It changed hands. The factory changed hands in the 1970s to General Shale Brick, took it over. But the factory operated up until about 2000, and in 2010, all the buildings, the site was closed and the buildings were demolished. At which point, the city purchased the property. There was a period after the buildings were demolished, and there was a new owner came in. There was a proposed fuel terminal where fuel would be brought in by train, mixed with ethanol, and shipped back out again. There was tremendous pushback from the neighboring communities, both for fear of the potential for pollution, of fuel spills right on the top of right adjacent to the Chattahoochee River, but also because of the significance of this site. Spearheading many of those efforts were Donna Stevens, right here in our audience, and we'll be speaking to them. But the fuel terminal was canceled, and that gave the city an opportunity to purchase this property, which we did with the help of the Conservation Fund in 2022. And the city purchased that property with the intent of redeveloping that site into a park, into a passive green space, and restored floodplain, and most significantly, a memorial to the victims of convict leasing. Since the city purchased that property, we have been busy. We have been applying for grants and investigating the environmental conditions, especially the environmental contamination on the site. as well as forging partnerships with groups mentioned earlier, that Anthony mentioned earlier, like the National Center for Civil and Human Rights and the Chattahoochee Creek Descendants Coalition, both of which DJ and Donna are going to step up here afterwards and talk about what they are doing. We also, as Anthony mentioned, established a board, an advisory board appointed by the mayor and city council to help the city, to kind of steer the city through this process, help us make decisions, but also to investigate the history of the site and and develop a narrative that tells the story of the site, links it to the injustices of the convict leasing era, and shows how that history connects to the current day. From Buford Dam up by Lake Lanier down to Chattahoochee Bend State Park in Coweta County, it's over 100 miles. And the vision is for a connected trail along the entire length of that corridor on one or in places both sides of the river, as well as a paddle trail for canoeing and kayaking with designated takeouts, campsites along the way, so these can be multiple day trips. And then there's additional parkland, additional parks that could be built, local trail connections or regional trail connections to be connected in with us. The study, Atlanta's portion of the Riverlands is right there. We're essentially right at the center of the corridor. The perspective of this drawing doesn't make that clear, but we have got about 5 miles of that 100+ miles within the city that we are going to activate. After the study was completed, it is now the job of all the local jurisdictions and cities along the way to refine these plans and build them out. The city did get a grant from the Atlanta Regional Commission to do a little bit of additional planning to nail down exactly where the trail is going to go, what new parks could be developed, how to get down to the river, and other things to figure out in order to start construction of this vision. This is a picture from that 2020 study showing just what an example of that trail could look like along the river. This is another drawing from that same report showing kind of a vision of how trails could run along the river in front of the Chattahoochee Brick area. At the time of the study, the future of the site, it was not owned by the city, and the future of the site was very much in question. So there was no proposal for what was going to happen on that site. But now that the city owns it, we can include that in our plan. We are planning, and here is another picture of the Chattahoochee Brick site in its current state, the buildings having been demolished. The city is planning on hiring a design firm to help us lead the planning of both the Chattahoochee Riverlands corridor to flesh that out and get it ready for construction, as well as to come up with a vision and a plan for how the Chattahoochee Brick site will be turned into a park and memorial and green space. We're anticipating that to start in the summer or the fall. It depends on our procurement, and that can move slowly at the city, but we're imagining that the design, the public effort to gather ideas and start the discussions of what these sites should look like and what should happen along that river court will start this summer or in the fall. Here's a few pictures of the site as it currently exists. You can see it's very much a post-industrial site. The buildings have mostly been demolished, but there's still building slabs out there. There's remains of old loading docks. There's piles of bricks, lots of construction debris. The site is going to take a lot of work to redevelop. It's also quite flat. You can see there has been tremendous amounts of change to the land over the 150 years of industry out there. There were multiple phases of demolition and construction to the Chattahoochee Brick Factory. There was a significant amount of soil brought in to fill the floodplain to allow for the expansion of the Chattahoochee Brick Factory, as well as when the construction of I-285 happened in the 1960s. The Proctor Creek runs right at the edge of this site. Proctor Creek was rerouted and additional fill was brought in for the construction of the highway. So it is a very manipulated site with a lot of work to do to clean it up. When we do hire our design firm, one of the first things that the city plans to do is to get archaeologists out onto the site for several reasons. One reason is, while we know that the buildings have been largely demolished, there's a couple of remains of some historic stone walls, but essentially the only thing left is what's on the ground plan as building slabs. And we know that there are still some tunnels intact underground. Here's a picture taken before the demolition work. This is a picture taken by the previous owner of the site when they were doing some preliminary archaeological investigations. So knowing that there's tunnels still intact underground, we are hoping and suspecting that there are still remains of some of the buildings as well, building foundations at least. We would like to identify those, delineate them, so that we can use those, the existing foundations or remnants of those buildings to really tell the story in a concrete way to future visitors. One of the other things that we will ask the archaeologists to do is to investigate the possibility and look for human burials on the site. We know that during the convict leasing era, there were prisoners that died on the site. We don't know what happened to their bodies. They could have been picked up by families. We don't have good records on that. But there's a reasonable suspicion that some of those convicts were buried on the site. There is a stone here kind of representing this idea. This was seen on site. It is not a grave marker. It was brought onto the site, I believe, by family members or people who knew of Avery Bates and his stay at the Chattahoochee Brick Company. But it does not represent it. This does not mark a grave, but it does note, it does mark the death of one of the convicts out on the site. The third thing that we want to do, and this isn't exactly archaeology, but related, is additional historic investigations to understand, what the truth of what happened at the Chattahoochee Brick site, its connections to the growth of Atlanta during this period, understanding more about the convict leasing and its kind of implications to what the current issues that we face as a society today. There have been, a lot of supposition about that, that there's a link between the practices of convict leasing and the mass incarceration that we are looking at today. And these are all things that we want to document well so that when we do have a discussion about memorialization, we have an understanding of what actually happened, and we can have a meaningful discussion about that. One of the other aspects of the site that we will have to address is environmental contamination. This is related to the industrial past. There is a lot of... Well, we skipped ahead. Can we get that? There we go. Okay, there's a little lag. At any rate, when that slide reappears, there is contaminated soil in the site. I've done some fairly extensive investigations of it and identified the areas that still need to be cleaned up. And they show on here, yes, the squiggly red lines at the bottom. I hope they would appear a little bit better, but those are the areas that still have known soil contamination that needs to be cleaned up before the site is safe to bring people onto it. It's not extensive across the site, but it is a significant contamination that we will have to address. We do have a grant from the EPA. We've already gotten funding to do that work, and that will be happening over the next couple of years while the planning of the site continues. One other thing that I wanted to note is you can see the yellow lines are the property lines. It's multiple parcels that we're going to, that are been assembled for the site, but you can see that between the river parcel, and the remainder of the site, there is a rail line. That is an active rail line that the city does not own. So that's one more challenge to get our visitors down to the river. We have got to figure out how to get over or under that rail line. One other aspect that we will have to include in the planning is the fact that a large part of the site is within the 100-year floodplain. There's some fairly extensive restrictions on what restrictions on what can be built within the floodplain. Essentially no buildings, nothing vertical that takes up any flood volume. Trails are fine, fields are fine, ground level things are fine, but this actually works well with the city's intent for this property. The Department of Watershed Management put in, helped purchase this property, and the reason that they put in funds was exactly for the restoration and or rehabilitation of the floodplain, as well as to create buffer protections for the stream and for Proctor Creek, which rolls up the bottom edge of the stream here on the south of the site, and the Chattahoochee River. And in fact, immediately across Proctor Creek, Watershed already owns about a 30-acre parcel that has been under a conservation program for almost 20 years now, specifically for the protection of water quality out here. So that brings me to kind of the next steps. We, as I mentioned earlier, we are intending to hire a design firm. Hopefully we'll be able to get them under contract and working by summer or early fall, at which point we will really start the archaeology work, some of the survey work, some of the hidden parts that go on to the planning, but we will also be starting public conversations about the site, about the riverlands, and what everyone wants to see out there. There's going to be more education about the history of the site and talking about how that, how do we reckon with that history? But that is coming up, and I hope that all of you will come and participate when that planning work happens. We're anticipating that will last about 2 years. There's some unknowns in there, especially related to archaeology, but that's what our general time frame is. And the end point of this kind of first stage will be a plan for the site of the Chattahoochee Brick, as well as a refined plan for the Chattahoochee River corridor there. The brownfield work, or the environmental contamination cleanup, is going to be happening at the same time as this planning process. The first year or so is going to be refining the cleanup plan, getting the approvals from all the regulators, and then we will actually do the field work to remove the contaminated soil or deal with it in the way that is determined. So with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Donna Stevens to talk about the work that she's doing with the Chattahoochee Brick descendants.
First, I'd like to thank everyone here this evening. 8 years ago, I didn't think I would have a room of people listening to me talk about Chattahoochee Brick, and it's heartwarming to do this. I could talk about a variety of things today, but I'm going to talk about some of the milestones that we have as a coalition have acquired, or as I have acquired. The coalition was only officially established about 3 years ago, but I have been engrossed with Chattahoochee Brick since I saw the documentary One Rainy Saturday, about 2012, I believe it was, with my sister, and that was the catalyst that got me involved in this. I would like to, since my time is brief today, I'd like to talk about, I call them my big six. They are Emory, Georgia State, Georgia Tech, Morehouse, Spelman, and University of Georgia. And you might ask me, why do I have those six singled out? That's been my academic community engagement over these years. I've had students from a variety of programs and a variety of classes task themselves with Chattahoochee Brick, approach me about projects with Chattahoochee Brick from a variety of standpoints. Most recent one was Georgia State's graduate class. It's interpretive history. They worked on I was their client. They had me come in and speak with them and go back and forth about the ideas of what they were going to do. And they assembled a great package of the history of Chattahoochee Brick for me. And that will be part of our website, the coalition's website. I just spoke recently with the professor, Dr. Catherine Wilson, just a few days ago. So we're gearing up for this semester with that. But my heart is just full because just last week, prior to the Morehouse event with Clarissa, with her, she, that morning, I met with a group of high school students, and they're very passionate about Chattahoochee Brick, and I am so excited because those young minds, and they want to know. And I kept telling them, well, we can't get on the property. There's a train. The train comes through every 5 minutes. And I was just letting them know it's cold outside. They were just like, no, we gotta come, we gotta come, we gotta come. So they braved the elements because it was cold that morning. And we stood out there and we talked about Chattahoochee Brick, and they walked away wanting to do more. They are investing themselves for the remainder of the school year. So when you have that passion in those students, Georgia Tech's city had a city planning studio graduate class. Again, I was their client, and they produced a 90-page document as to what we could do with Chattahoochee Brick. And you have to remember, this was during COVID when they did this. We had no access to the property, but they came up with this stellar project. And I couldn't believe that this was, what they've done. Morehouse, obviously, has been a godsend. We've had students do individual projects. I've sat on panels for them. Emory was the law school. I spoke on their reparations. The law school had a reparations panel, and I was invited to come in and speak with them. So you have all these things going on, as well as the Conservation Fund, Trust for Public Land, City of Atlanta, and various other opportunities to speak. So we stay busy. So that I think that kind of sums it up. I hope I didn't leave anyone out, but I just had to give shout out to my schools.
Hello. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. All right. Good to see you all. Thank y'all so much for being here. Happy Black History Month. And I start with that to start that it's exciting that we are having this conversation during Black History Month, talking about our future. Dr. Harris really laid it out. Like, we have talked of, we're identifying what's happened on the site, and you kind of laid out, and we're making plans for where we want to go. And the first part of that has really been understanding that this is a us project. Like, this is for us, by us. Like, this is for the community. And so in that same spirit, really would like to just take a minute to kind of uplift some of the work that the center's doing and how we want to support the city in their work, and also the various projects that are happening are really around this site and project. I'll start by really talking about what the Truth and Transformation Initiative is. You may have heard. So we really are focused on the truth telling of history. We find ourselves in a very precarious moment where we struggle as a country to talk about difficult history. Most notably, we really work with the people that are doing that work in Atlanta. So we've done a lot of work to support the work around folks who have been working around the 1906 race massacre and bringing that back into the public memory, and also the forced labor that happened in Atlanta. And it's really important why we do that in Atlanta, because so many times communities from all over look to Atlanta for a model. How is Atlanta talking about the history? How is Atlanta doing community engagement? How is Atlanta telling its story? And so it's really important that we as citizens here, I know people in Atlanta are always like, are you from here or not? But how Atlanta talks about its history. And so to do that work, we have the way we are looking to support is really with education materials. I'll start by saying there is nothing around forced labor that exists in Georgia state standards around curriculum. Students can go their entire education matriculation in this state and never hear about this. The way that these bricks were sent widely, that information doesn't exist. It hasn't been taught. There are so many people that I meet that say, I didn't know that there was a labor site right down the street from my home. Because that one thing in Andrews, that this was a neighborhood. There are homes and schools and senior living, like right within, you can walk to them, honestly, from the site. And so there's a deep need for education around this, but really at the educational level, we have to think around how students can engage with this history and can learn this history. And so that's one part. So we're working with Dr. Nina Gilbert from Morehouse as well, to actually create the first Georgia-aligned curriculum around forced labor for Georgia. That will be applied to 8th grade through 12th. We're also working with Doug Blackman and Dr. Harris as well and as gathering student researchers, one thing we also need to identify is who were these people that were on this site. We want to actually identify their names and also their descendants, right? Because we know that there are people today that are connected to this this site and this history. We've also been in conversation with Ancestry. Georgia has something called the Georgia Convict Labor Registry, and it's really something that no other state has. And it was actually digitized by Ancestry at one point. And so we're having a conversation about them. If we can access that record, right, so we can begin to see who these people were, right? Because with that registry, you get biographical information that you need for genealogy research, right? You get name, you get former job, right? This porter might have been a barber, might have been an attorney, right? So we can begin to paint like a biographical sketch of these people and begin to really tell their stories that way. We're also working to actually create a convening of national leaders. One thing I'd like to share is there are people doing this work all over the country to memorialize and talk around forced labor. So this is something that we're not doing by ourselves, and we should be in conversation and community with those other sites that are doing this work, so that way we can do it the right way and also learn from other mistakes that people have made. You know, one thing, we had a really moving experience in Tulsa where we learned so much about mistakes that were made and errors and how that caused more harm to the community that they're working really hard to repair, or in some ways not. And so how can we avoid those, but also work to really make sure that this project is full of support, but also done the right way. And then lastly, I'll just share is we have to know that Atlanta is a city of art. We're a city of music and murals. And so how can we tell this story through art? How can we support artists that want to depict this story as a mural or a show or a song, right? How can we support those? So we're actively looking and have a fund to support what might be a micro grant for the West Side around this project, or even just a beautification around, but how we tell this story in multiple ways, right? There's an educational way, there's a community way, but there's also an art way. And so that's kind of the work we're leading and talking about at the center. We are supporting the city as they do community engagement as well. And we're also thinking on ways of how this site might also be able to be viewed for other communities, right? So we're thinking around how we can do pictures and videos since the site isn't safe, but how we might support people being able to see the site or at least hear the history of the site. And the last piece on the research piece is we actually want to identify a really economic understanding of Chattahoochee brick. How many bricks were made and where did they go? How much were they bought for? And how many, right? And so that really would let us know really the impact of these people on this site. We don't know their names, right? We don't know much about them, but we knew that they are responsible for where we are today. And we have to tell that story, and we have to do that together. And so the center is glad to be a collaborator and a partner in that, and would love to stay connected with you all. And I'll be around to take questions and also to share ways we can stay connected and you can get engaged with the center and this project around truth telling. Thank you all.
We are still at the very, very, very early stages of even thinking about how to create a community engagement plan. What does that even mean? Really, what does community engagement really mean? My background is in museum education. Museums think about these kinds of things all the time. And it's very difficult because you have to consider, well, do we let a community, whatever that means, decide what an exhibit is going to be about a particular subject matter just because the individuals in that community might represent the subject matter of the exhibit? Or do you let scholars, professionals who study these things create an exhibit because they know the information? The answer is probably somewhere in the middle, because no one, I'm Black, but I don't know everything about the total Black experience. I know my Black experience. And so the answer to that question is probably somewhere in the middle. And as long as I'm involved, I'm going to make sure that we move this process along in a way that helps the city really accomplish those kinds of goals.